is in properly looking at it, it's a lesson of stories. I challenged my son this morning after I told him my story about how God worked in my life. I asked him his story, and he that quickly told his story about how God worked in his life. And we'll get onto it. But Paul, when he writes to the Romans, he is telling them, Paul is telling the people he's writing to that this is God's story about how he got people's attention. And then the next chapter, he challenges them to present their bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto the Lord, which is our reasonable service. And let's bow. And Judy, would you want to pray for us? Okay.
Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that we have a place to come to just tell you how much we love you and worship you and want to do the things that you want us to do. We ask that you just bless this class, Lord. Touch Dickon as he teaches the lesson. Draw us all close to you, Lord. That's all that we want, is just to be closer to you. In your precious name we ask these things. Amen.
Amen. So probably, 4 or 5 weeks ago, I said I didn't really like Romans. Man, I've really fallen in love with Romans. It has so much, but you don't get Romans if you don't work at it. There's no free lunch. You can look at the Gospels and you can follow Jesus as he walked here and there, and you can get a lot of easy morsels. But if you follow Paul, it is a grind out exercise of your faith. So I challenge you, as the close of our time together today, I'm going to challenge every one of us to come up with our story on what? You just want to say hi? So let's take a look at I want to begin it by, and I don't know how much this applies. The writer of the lesson, I can't remember his name, but he starts out by saying, have you seen anybody that didn't always measure up? They might have been close to the Lord, but then you see them doing some things in their life where you just you shake your head and you say, what? I thought they were smarter than that. Well, his example is Constantine. Now, the only thing that I know about Constantine is he brought people to the Christian faith with the sword. I mean, it's not a real... When Peter cut off the ear of the soldier with a sword, what did Jesus do? Picked it up, put it back on his head. Jesus didn't believe in the sword. Constantinople did. But here's the interesting thing about it. They said that Constantine never got baptized until he was almost in the grave. And people would look at it because baptism was a big deal. I mean, Jesus' ministry was started by baptism. So it was a big deal, right? I mean, we think it's a big deal around here. We had a baptism last week, and the young guy, what all did he say? He was into drugs. He had an induced coma for 30 days, and now he's getting baptized because he said, man, I had enough. That's his story. So that will help you to make your story. But let me, two questions here, and then we're going to move on. While none of us is an emperor, I don't know of any of you that's an emperor, right? Are there areas of our lives that we keep unbaptized? Think about it just for a minute. Is there anything in your life that you would not want to expose to your Christian brothers and sisters? You don't have to. I mean, I'm not asking you to answer it. This is food for thought. If you're living here and you could live here, what makes you stay here? Here's another question. I think goes along with it. Are there parts of our career, our family life, or finances that we delay giving to God for God's purposes? Only you and I can answer that for ourselves. But that's what this lesson, I jotted this down. I said today, we're going to look at how God has provided for us. And then we're going to conclude by examining our response to Him. Should be an interesting thing. The transition goes like this. Because of what God has done for us, Paul calls us to give our whole being to God. This is how we worship. True worship is giving everything you have to God and watching Him do with your life what He wants to do. So let's read you're our favorite reader. You know that? You know you're right here at eyesight. Okay. The first one is Romans 11:25-32.
I do not want to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godliness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gift and His call are irrevocable. Just as you, who were at one time disobedient to God, have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience. So they too have now become disobedient in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God's bound everywhere over to disobedience, so that He may have mercy on them all. On the depth of
That's good.
Okay.
Who are God's chosen and elect people?
Jews.
The Jews. Do you ever wonder how in the world? I mean, they don't want anything to do with. They want everything to do with God. But as we know salvation through Jesus, they want no part of it.
Right.
I was in Israel on a trip one time, and you know how I have a big mouth. I mean, I gab whatever. So anyway, we're sitting having a little snack, and this young gal was waiting on us, and I asked her something about Jesus. Oh my word. The sledgehammer came out. The cold chill. It was just incredible. She just absolutely came unglued and left the table and serving us very quickly. Stupidity on my part. I mean, the Jewish people don't believe in the Messiah. Someday they're going to. Now, because the Jewish people did not follow through and do what God wanted them to do, and that's to spread the gospel. I've said this many times. Look at my hand. Over here is the Mediterranean Sea. Israel is right where my thumb is. You can't go to the east and trade without going right through Israel, unless you fly. If you want to go to Egypt, they have all kinds of products and things like that. You can't go to Egypt from up here unless you go through Israel. Israel's known as the belly button of the world. It's not a flattering thing, but that's the reality. The center of God's universe is Israel. Traffic went through there. They were supposed to, when people would pass through there, they were supposed to show the people how God wanted them to live and what it took to have a relationship with Him. What did they do with their relationship with God? They said, we're elect. We're privileged. Get away from us. Do you remember how they were exclusionary? They were isolationist. And God, because of that, God says, I'm going to turn things upside down. And I'm going to bypass my vessel for bringing the gospel to the world. And I'm going to give it to the Gentiles. Now, who was the main player in giving the gospel to the Gentiles? It started with the guy that had a dream, and he had these animals pass through him, and the Lord told him in the dream, go and eat. You remember that? That was Peter. I want you to understand this. There's always a story behind how God works. There's a story right there. Peter. After Peter, who did God choose? He took the most despicable human being as far as treatment of the Christians, and he struck him down on the road to Damascus. He was going there to kill Christians. Go ahead.
Because this happened, God did this. But God wasn't surprised that that happened.
He's not surprised about anything.
He wasn't caught off guard.
The question came up by the writer, and he said this, why is it that God has all of these things that He puts into motion, even though people are disobedient? Do you have any? We've taught it in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you grasp onto it. God always does the right thing. He's righteous and He's faithful. Do you think God is capable of turning His back on Israel forever? No. Do you think the United States is capable of turning their back? It's going to happen. I don't know when. I'm not predicting it, but it is going to happen. So anyway, here's a couple of questions. He basically said that the Jewish people were very conceited. We're special. We're privileged. And so they became conceited. So here's a question. How would you define conceit? Have you ever met anybody that they were super spiritual? Have you? What did it do to you? Huh? Yeah, thought they were, yeah. So the Jewish people became conceited, and they have paid a price over the course of history. If you think about it, there were millions of them killed in the Holocaust. They have, because of their disobedience, God has chastised them, but Here would be a warning for all of us. Don't become conceited. I'll tell you a story about myself. Because I'm into the Bible, and some people in my class, when I tell things out of the Bible, it's like they've never heard of it before. And I'm saying to myself, where have these people been? It would be easy for me to be conceited, but the Lord makes sure that I'm not. Don't take your privilege and use it in a conceited way. Let's go to one. Go ahead.
And maybe it's off, but I think of Jim Jones.
Yeah.
He started out good. He did have a love for God, and he started the street ministries and all that, but it went to his head, and he thought he was so good, and people followed him to their death.
Yeah.
You know, because he was conceited.
Yeah, scary. Let's go to a couple of stories. Why would Paul, in what Patty has just read, why would he bring to mind the patriarchs? Let's just take a couple of minutes and look at the patriarchs and look at their story. God, from the beginning, I told Mark this morning, I said, in the garden, sacrifice has always been a part of God's plan because of man's sin. What was the first thing God did when Adam and Eve sinned? He sacrificed animals so that he could cover their sins, right? It never changed from that point. Let's just look at Abraham. What was Abraham's sacrifice? He was tested by God to see if he was going to be faithful and righteous. So I can't imagine trudging up a mountain with wood strapped to my back and my son walking alongside of me. Can you? But it was all God's plan. It was the story that Abraham would live the rest of his life with. How God intervened in his life. God challenged him with the test, and then he intervened when it came right down to the sacrifice. Let's go to Abraham's son. How many of you know very much about Isaac? Can you give us a little? The lesson today is all about stories, right? What is Isaac's story? Anybody? If you want to come to a really good class, you can stay, Sharon.
They're looking for the Sunday school book.
The books? Oh, I can't help it. What is Isaac's story? How long did it take for Isaac to get the girl of his dreams? 14 years. Do you think that story stayed in his mind about how God took care of him? How about his son Jacob? What is Jacob's story? Yeah? And what else about him? The thing that he would remember the rest of his life.
He wrestled with God.
And what happened?
He became lame.
He had a limp for the rest of his life. Do you think that's a good story to say, I know God takes care of me? Here's what I want you to think about, and I've already said it, but I want you to think about your story today. So we now have looked at how God chose Israel. They disobeyed. He opened the door for the Gentiles to come in. When the last, I love what Bill Weiss used to say. He said, one day, God's going to come and the last person is going to give their heart to the Lord, and then we're going to be snatched away. And think about that. God opened the door for us. We happen to be Gentiles. But now we have the same family as God's chosen. I read one time, and I can't remember where it is, but because I gave my heart to Jesus, I'm a Jew. Now, grafted in. Okay, there's maybe one more. This is the thing that it blows me away. I find it hard to believe that looking back on what I used to be, how God loved me, and He worked so that I could become right with Him through His Son. Now, it's taken a long time, and I'm older than dirt, but I think about it took me a long time to get to the place where I'm not exclusionary. When I look now, I hope that when I look now and I see somebody doing evil things and whatever, I say to myself, what could I do that they might have a life-changing experience? I was grafted in spite of what I have done and the way I've lived. Yeah. Saved by grace. Okay, you want to read the next section?
Starting at
33 through 36.
Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable His judgments and His paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been His counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from Him and through Him and for Him are all things. To Him be the glory forever. Amen.
When you think about somebody that lived for God, or you know the story, they lived for God, they were just super faithful. It's an Old Testament person. And it had to come down to the point where God, after his friends beat him up, do you know who I'm talking about? Job. So he goes through all of these things, and once again, it's a test. It's a story. Job finally gets to the place where, man, his wife is even against him. Why don't you just go and die? I mean, come on.
Curse God and die.
Curse him, yeah. And so that didn't happen. And all of his family perished, right? The people he loved. I mean, can you think of anything worse than that? He lost all of his possessions and he lost his family. And then he had to listen to God come and say, hey, where were you when I made the ocean? Where were you when I made the what did he say it was? Must have been big fish or big animals. And he had to just sit back and say, I'm undone. I mean, woe is me. And then here's the way I look at Job in the book of Job. This is maybe a crazy thing, but I see Job had two families and he won twice. First families are all lost. They go to heaven, right? Then he almost comes to curse God, but he doesn't. And then God gives him a brand new family. I mean, is that a good story? If you were in Job's shoes, Could you remember that story? So he says, basically he's saying here, how many of you are smart enough to know how God thinks? Huh?
Sometimes I can't figure out what he's thinking. It's like,
You know,
what are you thinking?
you know, there's many times in my life where I just say, Lord, I got a plan. Would you just put the plan in place? It's better than what's happening now. Have you ever done that?
Laughed at you, right?
Huh? No, he just ignores me.
Right.
I mean, but have you ever done that? You can't figure out what's going on? But you know in your heart that God knows more than you, and He's working on your behalf, and things will work out. If people will give Him just a little bit of a chance. So in that, there's only 2 questions in this area. Paul says to them, in view of these stories and what I've just told you about how the Jewish people were the elect of God, and then God said, they're not listening, so I'm going to set them aside for a time, and I'm going to bring in the Gentiles. Now, Paul is saying, this is the story. What is the response that you should have? He's talking to them now in their, church or synagogue or wherever. He's saying, what is your proper response? Patty just read it. What is it? It's to worship. I asked myself this question, or I made this comment. Worship gets our eyes off of us and onto God. So if you're having a tough time, find it within yourself to go in your closet and worship. And everything that's happening over here, when you begin to worship, will dissipate, possibly even go away, and you'll be on your way. Here's one more question. Have you ever thanked God for the ways He has worked in your life? I see a lot of heads shaking. How did you imagine your life playing out compared to the way it did play out? I know a lot of you sitting here, and I know many of you probably have many stories, but I know many of your stories, and I think I'm going to tell you my story, and then if you want to share yours, that'll be a good thing. When Carol and I got out of college, I immediately got drafted. And I was in the service for 3 years. And I came back and started working for Kroger's. And it was a good job because it got me through college. And then I went into sales with Procter & Gamble. And while I was with Procter & Gamble, I started rubbing shoulders with people at Portage First. Darwin Miller, Jim Leap, and Don Coker and some of those. And they whet my appetite for possessions. Now, they weren't possessed by possessions, but I became possessed. I wanted to be a millionaire. I was possessed. So I began to, started with a duplex, and then another duplex, and then a fourplex, and then another fourplex. And you know what happened? God started taking every one of those possessions away. That was so painful, I can't even remember that. But then He began to, here's what He did in my life. He took these possessions away and this thinking away, and He began to, here's the things I've experienced in life, and here's the stories for my life. I built Portage Christian School, or I helped God do it. And I told this story to Mark this morning, and he remembers many of the times we worked over there and everything else. And then I got a chance to go to Brazil, 4 mission trips. Changed my life. So no longer am I thinking about getting rich. I'm thinking about what I can do for the Lord. And that's my story. And I can tell you many, many examples about how that played out in my life. It's amazing. You want to tell? Does anybody want to tell? You want to tell your story?
Yeah, when I was younger,
Uh-huh.
long story short, when I was a teenager, right after I was a teenager, heading down the wrong place.
Uh-huh.
And now I think back, a lot of people were praying for me because, as far as I can see, I was dating somebody that wasn't good about him, and then one day he goes, "Oh, I'm getting married to someone else," and I was devastated. You know, I thought my world crushed. You know, so, but I knew Wally when we were kids, and we started, you know, seeing each other. Anyway, long story short, I feel like the Lord just picked me up out of this situation and said, "This is not good for you," and put me in a good one.
Uh-huh.
So that's my story. Very condensed.
You know, here's the thing. When you have a story and you're praying about somebody to come to the Lord, you know the most effective thing you can do? Tell your story. It's not bragging because you didn't do it. And there is nobody could ever tell Kathy that her story is not true. It's her story, right? Now, I don't know what your story is, but go ahead.
I just want to say that time when I thought my life was, God really does take things that we think aren't good and use them for good. Because when you look back at your life, you know, he turned, like my girls, they both went through horrible times, but then the Lord put them in better situations.
Yeah,
Once they got trusted.
yeah. You know, we're no different than the Jewish people. The Jewish people, God had a plan for them. They said, "I don't like the plan." So they go into all kinds of bad things, and then God really shakes their life up and says, "You know, I'm going to set you aside for a while. I'm going to use these people over here to get my purposes accomplished." Isn't that incredible? You know, I've heard your story many, many times. You lived on the wrong side of the tracks in a little bitty town. I forget the name of the town. Mitchell, Indiana. And the Salvation Army made all the difference. Well, God made all the difference. But He used, in your case, the Salvation Army. Now, when she tells that story, I've heard that story in class many, many times. I never get bored by the story. It's a story of reality. What is with you? Oh, let her tell the story. It's unbelievable. We need to be telling the story, our story, because there are people that need to know that God is working in people's lives. You get that? Tell the story.
And I skipped to, well, all right, I'll take that. My parents were divorced, and my mother was very young when she had me. And Mitchell, Indiana, if you lived on this side of the track, all the bums jumped off the rail tracks, come in to get drinks and whatever, and they would always come through our property. So we were considered the scum. very poor people. And there was no churches on our side of the town, just the Salvation Army. And I can remember once the bells ringing, and I was curious. I went to see what it was. And these ladies with these big black hats and gowns, I was just awestruck. And the first time that I can actually remember being put on somebody's lap and their arms around me, and Christian music being played, and she's rocking me. I can remember this. Eventually, we moved to the other side of the town where we had the apartment building that we were at. Here and here, and they were both beautiful. But I chose the very pretty one that had all the stalactites and the lights up by the altar. And you gotta remember, I came from the wrong side of the tracks. Back there, we did not wear shoes. We went into the Salvation Army barefoot. Ragged clothes. So I walked down the aisle of this very pretty church. Eyes up there on the altar. The next thing I know, somebody's got me by the nape of the neck, and they threw me out.
Oh my.
They threw me out and told me not to come back until I had spoken. I was crying, and I got to remember the lady that was on the corner, her arms around me, and I have my little testament that she got me, and she says to me, one of these days, God's going to put shoes on your feet, and you'll have shoes after shoes.
Wow.
Now, does anybody know anything about me and my shoes? so that's one of the little funny things about.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you that I did not go back to that church. I went to the other one on the corner. That's where I learned about Jesus and stuff like that. I did not become a Christian until we moved up here with Reverend Cleaner's church, and we went to camp. And that's where I gave God my do whatever you want with me, I'm yours.
Wow.
I came from the wrong side of the tracks really bad.
You know, stories like Judy's are effective when you're talking to your friends about Jesus. Your story is your witness. So it's important. And you're important. It doesn't mean you get conceited about it. It means that you were chosen out of your circumstance to be His. You're already His creation. Now you are His child. Big difference. Let's see if there's one more. Oh, I was telling my son this morning. You know what his story is? You know how he came to the Lord? Persecution by what he considers to be an evil organization, the Union. They've been on his case for 4 years. And he came back to the Lord. I could not tell you how it happened. I know it did. And it's an incredible story. And he said, well, Dad, I tell that story all the time. And he used to hate what happened to him and hate the people who were doing it. You know what? And this is a crazy thing. I don't know if you're like my son or you're like me. But he says, can you believe it, Dad? Those people that are doing this to me, if before they die, they're on their deathbed, and they give their heart to the Lord, they get to go to heaven. He said, what is that, Dad? I don't have an answer. What's the answer to the thief on the cross? He lives a despicable life all of his life, and Jesus said, today, you're going to be with me in paradise. Is God, I hate to say this, but is He strange sometimes? I think He is, the way I think. Okay, now here's the point in the lesson where it goes from, this is what God did. And Paul is saying, because He did this, would you consider doing this? You want to read this? It's the short portion, just Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2.
Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
It's laid out in pretty simple terms, right? Don't give him your leg or your arm or your hands. Give him everything. Now, I'm of the opinion that there are few people that give him everything at the very beginning. I believe he keeps chipping away at things that we think are important, that he knows are not important. And he chips away until, you know what his goal is? He wants everybody in this room and everybody that gives their hearts, he wants them, when they get to heaven, to look like Jesus, to act like Jesus. I'm telling you what, he has got a huge job. At my age, I don't know how in the world he could get all those things done before I die. How about you? You have any wrinkles? I say crazy things to Kathy Godme, and she comes and just beats on me. Now, do you think she should do that? But do you think I should do what I do? You see what I'm... let me ask a couple of questions here. To you, what does it mean to be a living sacrifice? Would you rather be a living sacrifice or a dead one? The animals that covered Adam and Eve, they sacrificed, and the end result was they were dead. Their mission and their purpose was over, right? What about us? If we give our heart to the Lord and we say, "You're really Lord," then he can begin to use us, and you have no idea how he's going to use you. Do you like my stories? I mean, I think I'm redundant, but do you, I mean, when I tell these stories, do you like them? Here's a story I like. Portage First didn't pay their budgets for 7 years while we went there. And then I became friends with a missionary in Brazil. His name is Rex Ludwig. I think he passed away, didn't he? Yeah. And I got to go to Brazil, but it wasn't with Portage First. But something tugged at my heart, and I came back, and I remember Hilliard Irvin came to our church. Anybody remember Hilliard? Anyway, my wife does. Hilliard came back, and he wasn't a polished guy at all. I mean, he was really a wonderful man. He said, "If I'm going to come and be your pastor, we are going to pay budgets." And we had unbelievable, stringent things that happened to us, but we paid our budgets. And then I went to Hilliard one day and I said, "Hey, would you be interested in a work and witness trip?" And he said, "Well, when we get our budgets paid, I'll be interested in it." Well, here's an interesting thing. We got a chance to go to Brazil, and Rex Ludwig came to our church, and he brought somebody who had been saved in Brazil, and he was a rock star singer. I mean, he was like, you hear these names like, I don't know, but he was a rock star singer. He gave his heart to the Lord. And he came here, and he came to Portage First, and when he got here, Rex got me off to the side, and he says, I am going to have Luciano give his story. Now, I happen to believe that Rex Luggett is a tremendous preacher. And I said, oh my word, what are you doing, Rex? What are you doing having a rock star come and give his story? And Rex told me, he said, hey, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So he gave his story. At the end of the story, we needed to be at the airport in less than 2 hours. For 45 minutes, the people paraded in front of Luciano, hugging him and telling him his story was so wonderful. At the end of that, we had less than an hour to get to O'Hare. I was going on, you know how they have this extra lane over here? I was going on that. You know the extra lane over here? I was going on that just to get to the airport. It was crazy.
He was singing, me.
Yeah. Well, we got him there, and then I came back and presented, how about if we have a work and witness trip? And Hilliard said, man, I think that's a great idea. We got our budgets paid. And do you know, in 2 months, we had enough people to go on the trip, and the money for the church that we were going to work on down there, it was in the bank. 2 months. Can you think about that? I love that story. So anyway, we went, and then we had a guy in the church, Cliff and Mary Maxwell. I mean, I don't know if any of you know him, but when Mary gave her heart, she was a Catholic. She gave her heart to the Lord, and Cliff began to call her Bible breath. Can you imagine that? And then it wasn't very long that he gave his heart to the Lord. And then he found out that we were going to go to Brazil, and he had breakfast or something with Pastor Hilliard, and he said, what are we doing? We got a leaky roof, and we just barely got our budget. What are we doing going to South America? And Hilliard said, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. The next time we had a trip to Brazil, Cliff funded it. Can you, you go from here, is that a good story? These are stories about God. And I don't know how it happened, but I know that Mary, in her Bible studies and loving on her husband and everything else, made such an impact in his life that he gave his heart to the Lord 100%. And he was changed forever. So, I jotted this down. What ways of thinking permeate the world that you inhabit? Is sacrifice one of them?
For the world?
Yeah. Okay. What are some words that would characterize the world in which you live? My wife just said it a moment ago. She says, when people drive, me.
Right.
That is, it's all about me. It's not about anybody else. It's about me.
Right.
Okay. What about this word? Do you know of anybody that hoards? They can only think about getting more. That's the world in which we live. I once built a guy's house burned down. This is a good story. I love this story. And guy's house burned down, and we got to tear it down, and then I got to rebuild it. This is an amazing thing. He had a garage that was separate from the house and it did not burn down. That garage was filled to the rafters. When you opened the door, the service door to the garage, things fell out. But that wasn't enough. Then behind that big garage, he built another shed. And it was so full. He had lawnmowers that had, I don't know how long have you had a lawnmower? 30 years, 40 years? He had every lawnmower that he ever owned. None of them worked except the one he was using right now. But he would not part with any of those lawnmowers. Is that incredible? They were in the backyard. It was like a train back there. I couldn't believe it. And then the most important thing in his life was taken away. A sad, sad, sad story. I still to this day like the guy. But he had a son who was everything to him. He was his friend. He was his son. He was everything. And that son, because of depression, walked out on 94 in front of a truck. Beyond comprehension. If you're not careful and you hoard and you don't, I'm not saying God's going to take away your child or anything, but I'm just saying his story is so sad, it's beyond belief. Let me see if I can give you one more. Hey, Jason, how are we doing? 2 minutes. Okay, we're good. How about that? So we understand what permeates the world in which we live, right? But can we make a difference in the world in which we live? We tell our story. Go ahead.
Yes, I think we can make a big difference because just hearing her story, just a little kindness made a big, big difference in
Yeah.
her life. Just a little.
Yeah.
Many, many people.
A lot of times we don't even know it. That lady has no idea of the effect that she had in your life when she took you.
Well, she's probably dead.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But she would have never known, Oh.
I would challenge you to think about your story today as you walk out of here. And then I would challenge you to do one more thing. Now, this is a little scary. Everybody in this room can think about your story, right? But here's the step that's really important, and it goes with that verse. Present your body as a living sacrifice. If the Lord puts somebody on your heart and they're not a Christian, first thing you do is you pray for them. And you say, Lord, I'm available if you want me to be used to have an impact in their life. I would say, don't do any of these things that I've just talked about without praying about them, because they'll blow up in your face. If you say something to someone and they're not prepared by God, it's a turnoff. And that's me. Big mouth, crazy. But I think I'm getting better, and I want to be better. And what I'm saying is, here's what I want. We're as good as we let God let us or help us to be. That's how good we are. And don't get conceited about it. I'm just saying, you're privileged to be His. And He wants you to share your story with other people. You want to close, Carol? Yeah.
I love you,